Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Women in Construction Online Festival. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad to have you here. It seems a number of you joining from across the globe, which is fantastic. I'm so glad that we can connect with each other in this way. Of course, I would have loved to have seen you in person, but at least we can connect together in this way virtually and interact. So that's something that we do have to be thankful for. What a year 2020 has been, and it's still going. It's still going, people. It's taken strength, resilience, and sometimes just good grace to get us to this point. And personally, if I reflect, I think one thing that 2020 has afforded me is the time and the space to really reflect, to think, and to really to consider, how can I be better? How can I do better? And perhaps there's one or two of you that's in this session that can identify with that. But as professionals in the construction industry, that can start to look like, how can I design better? How can I design for a better built environment? Which brings us to our talk for today. Okay, 2020, we are listening. How to rebuild for a better normal. At this point, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Catherine Campbell. I'm a real estate project executive, and I work with Google. I create creative spaces for Googlers to thrive, interact, collaborate. And when I'm not doing that, I'm probably wearing one of my many other hats, going under my many other titles, as many of you on this call: mother, architect, urban designer, love of the environment, SDG 9 activist, and change maker. So I'm either creating spaces for Googlers, which they love, or you can find me speaking on a panel in a session such as this one. When I'm not doing either of those two things, I'm having downtime, well-deserved, with my family. I shared a shot there of my husband and our 4-year-old daughter. That was on a recent trip to Zambia. Yes, that was Zambia. When we went to visit family, we're at the Victoria Falls there, and it's an absolutely breathtaking place. It was recently in the news, and I'll share this clip with you. Oh my gosh, the sound and the mist, it's just absolutely breathtaking. It's just so magical. So imagine my shock to see this in 2019. The worst drought in a century, and reduced the waterfalls to a trickle. Now that and a succession of other events really, really struck a chord with me, and it made me think of the impact of climate change, and really the role that the construction industry has to play in that. Because the construction industry is up there. It's one of the top 3 factors, the top 3 contributing factors to climate change. The construction industry on its own is the single largest global consumer of resources and raw materials. It consumes about 50% of global steel production, and each year, 3 billion tons of raw materials are used to manufacture buildings products worldwide. Now, that's just in the manufacturing. The buildings have a role to play as well. Buildings are responsible for 25 to 40% of the global total energy use, and it contributes hugely to the release of carbon dioxide. So when we see those figures, they're so significant, and we see these headlines, such as the ones that are on the screen, we can start to get a bit desensitized to it all, and we can start to forget and get disconnected to the human story behind these headlines. Recently, we've seen the wildfires that have taken place in the west coast of the United States. Some are still raging on, and where they're not raging on, there's just poor air quality. It's led to homelessness, loss of property, displacement. Or we go further afield to Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, where they've had unseasonal rainfall, and it's led to, the perfect breeding ground for a really, really stubborn locust. Now, this locust is swarming and decimating swathes of crops and farmland in the eastern Cape of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Now, this is a huge threat to our food security on a global scale. Now, we're familiar with the Australian fires, and we've seen lots of images of it in the news, but not a lot of us realize that 3 billion animals were either killed or displaced in that, and a huge threat to our biodiversity. Again, in tropical regions, we have flooding and disease contagion as a result of typhoid, malaria, cholera, dysentery. If we go further afield, we're in Amazon, the Amazon regions, and where we have fires there, we're creating huge losses of our CO2 sinks. We go further afield and back to sub-Saharan Africa, we're looking at the growth of the Saharan desert as the desert land starts to encroach on arable land. And what this does, completely unprecedented, it creates conflict between the nomadic herders and the farmers who are farming their arable land. When we put all these pieces together, we start to really appreciate the global impact of climate change and the role that the construction industry is actually playing in it as one of the top causative factors of climate change. It's a global impact. And we have to appreciate our interconnectedness. I am, because we all are. And we need to work together. We need to act together. Globally, global collaborations working together to achieve data-driven solutions. That really needs to be our mantra. Now, global collaboration is a fantastic way for us to work and really speed up the progress on climate change. So working here in this region, I'm based here in the UK, I could be working with people who have subject matter expertise in Asia, in Africa, in America. Cross-pollination of ideas to really, really spark that innovation. Global organizations have been doing it for decades. And we can see one such as the United Nations. They have the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, they have put professionals, consultants together to gather data to form trusted and verified, a single source of truth. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Their Sustainable Development Goals can be a guardrails for what we need to do to combat climate change. Now, there's 17 of them. There's a lot. They each have their functionality. But as professionals in the construction industry, we can hone into a few, Sustainable Development Goal 7, affordable and clean energy, or 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. That's one of my passions because we can really, really get some ground on that using digitization to really impact climate change. Or 12, responsible consumption and production. That starts to talk more about manufacturing and the best practices that we can employ. Or climate action. For me, I'm partial here. I think one of the more key goals is 17, because that starts to talk about partnership and the way that we can work together to drive some of these goals forward. The World Economic Forum, again, it's another one of these platforms that's really working together, looking at global collaboration to come up with some solutions to some of the issues that we have. Now, you pick a topics particularly pertaining to us. So real estate, for example, and they've created the World Economic Forum, that is, they've created strategic intelligence maps. Now, if we're to, in layman speak, that we roadmaps to a solution. Now, where it's real estate, we can look at things from how we use smart and innovative cities, or how the interconnectedness between sustainability, wellness, and real estate, or examining urbanization and how that has an impact on real estate. And they have these for a myriad of topics. Another one, climate change, particularly, how can we transition to clean energy, and what does that look like really for the construction industry? Or COVID-19, a topic that we're really having to focus into now. And the World Economic Forum starts to talk about how can we avoid the infection and the spread, and that largely impacts us in the construction industry and the built environment. How can we build to mitigate the infection and spread of COVID-19? So really, let's take it back. We're professionals within the construction industry. We've understood how we can collaborate, leveraging the platforms that the UN Sustainable Development Goals or the World Economic Forum Strategic Intelligence Maps affords us. Now let's look at the building's life cycle and how we design. Are we really designing for the building's life cycle? Now, largely, this is understood to be split into 3 phases. First, design, construction, decommission. As the years have gone on, we've started to see a bit of a disconnect between construction and decommission, and then again between decommission and design again. Perhaps a building's life cycle really looks like this: design, construction, operation, decommission, or repurpose, and then the materials. It brings it back down to 0. Because as designers, we need to appreciate that at the point where pen meets paper, or perhaps to be more apt, where we start to focus in on our laptops to design, we're designing in the energy use. Designing in the energy use into a particular building, whether it's through its construction phase and how it's constructed, or it's through how the building is operated, and whether or not the building can be repurposed. Because at the point of design, you can influence that. If I'm building a high-rise commercial stack building, I can design it such that either the circulation or the core affords it so that in years to come, when it starts to near the end of its use, it can be repurposed. Having retail as a ground floor platform or a plinth, and having a mid stack of residential and maybe a top stack of commercial. Or perhaps you could combine the top stack and the mid stack so you have live-work units and create that urban density. These are things we need to think of designers at the point that we start design and not further into a building's life cycle. If we do go down the road of decommission, are we designing a building so that it can be decommissioned properly and we can harness and extract as much of the material used from that building as possible? Can we get the bricks out of it? Can we get the steel out of it? These are questions we need to be asking ourselves as designers. And of course, it goes full circle. When we go back to the design phase, we need to be asking ourselves this question. Are we designing looking at new materials, or are we designing looking at a database or a bank of recycled materials? Now that we've understood the process and how we can impact change through the process of a building's life cycle, let's look at the quality of our designs. We're all good designers, so we know we should be designing buildings that are responsive to their local climates. And this is not just on a small scale of looking at residential projects. This is also looking at our larger, tall buildings, our stack buildings. We shouldn't be designing initially having mechanized ventilation in mind. We should be designing for passive, natural ventilation modes. And then we should move from there. And this should be for all seasons of the year. Now, with building materiality, there's been lots of advancements in research and development that has gone into building materials, right? And we've got new materials, newer ways of doing things. And in a lot of ways, we've gone back to our historical ways of doing things, right? So, for example, to the left of the screen, we have these adobe bricks. And that's in a building by Francis Kara. He's a West African architect, probably one of my favorite. And, the adobe bricks have this fantastic property of, this thermal mass. And what that enables it to do is it creates, within a tropical climate, it creates this cooler internal climate within the building because it stores that thermal mass within the adobe brick. And of course, when you're looking in the nighttime, the reverse is the case. It creates a warmer, more enjoyable climate internally. Rammed earth has exactly the same properties. So it's really good qualities of thermal mass. And when we go on to cross-laminated timber, or CLT, this is probably one of the most pioneering new materials that we can see out on the market. It's controversial in many ways. But one of the key, properties and the benefits of the CLT, or cross-laminated timber, is that it's from a renewable source. So we can farm this timber and we can, harness building materials from a renewable source. The energy use and the CO2 emitted in its manufacturing is far less than what you'd have with concrete or with steel. So we have an advantage in using that. And in its structural ability, it's almost comparable to steel. So you can get those tall buildings, those high rises, and give the density of scale with the built environment. Now, building health. This is not an area that historically we've talked a lot about in the construction industry, but it's one that's gaining ground. And I'm very pleased to see that it's gaining ground. It really talks about the internal quality of a building. It really talks about the quality of the space. It matches or measures indexes like indoor air quality or the quality of light. And it focuses on the internal quality of the space for the end user. So it measures VOCs in the air, or it makes sure that the chemical components of paints and finishes are such that it minimizes the amount of VOCs in the air and improves the quality of the space for the end user. Of course, there's the measure of geo-connectedness. And I love that word. It's a fantastic word. But that looks at how much we use natural materials in the the interior qualities of these buildings to create that space that connects us to nature. Biophilia is also another way of doing that, as well as improving on the indoor air quality. So this is a key index that we're watching and is gaining ground, building health. So now we understand that we can collaborate globally and leverage opportunities and information from the UN SDG goals or strategic intelligence maps on the World Economic Forum. We understand how we can really look at the building's life cycle and how we look at the fluctuation of energy between phases. So design, construction, operation, decommission, repurpose, and how we can harness materials and reuse them in our designs. We've looked at the quality of our designs and how we can improve that as good designers. But how can we accelerate all of this? Because let's face it, we are behind in the race against climate change, and we really do need to gain ground. How can we design smarter? How can we be smart in our race against climate change? Smart design. Smart design starts by understanding how each element or function of the building interacts with its user and its natural context, right? So smart buildings start with smart design, and smart designers understand this. So a lot of cities around the world have started smart city initiatives, or at least are looking at smart building initiatives. And effectively what this means is that it looks at creating a digital replica of the physical form of the building. Now, this enables us in real time or even accelerated time to test various parameters around energy use, around quality of light, around indoor air quality, and really make sure we get the most efficient permutations before we model it into a physical format of a building. So you can see the huge advantages in that. Now, when I started my journey into smart building, smart design, and understanding the whole digitization and the digital journey, I needed to get some definitions down. And I'll share some of these with you in case you're like me and you need that support to navigate this new world. So digitization, to start with, that's the transformation of analog modes of presenting data into a digital format. So effectively, that means we're taking your blueprints, your printed out plans, and we're turning them into a CAD file, or we're turning them into a BIM model. Now, digitalization looks at how we can leverage digital opportunities in traditionally analog settings and industries, such as the construction industry, historically analog. Now, digital transformation is where it gets exciting, because this looks at how we can bring all these things together and really utilize digitalized processes to enhance and to augment operating systems and industries. And that's where we can get our real advantage. If we dial it all back again, we're recapping into the building's life cycle. We understand how it all goes, and we understand that cycle and that circular, creating that circularity around it to really make sure that the energy use is efficient and the energy transmission is efficient. But what about if we stretch that into a process? We stretch it all out so that it's one process, and we start to appreciate how the digital transformation in the built environment has really created these advantages in any of these phases of a building's life cycle. So we take design for one. We now have BIM models, we have coding, we have machine learning and AI that makes that design process happen faster, quicker, more efficiently. We can permutate faster, iterate our designs faster, and we can test things faster. Or in the construction industry, we utilize methods such as virtual reality or augmented reality to really make sure we have clash detection, and we make sure that we use our time efficiently, we use that program efficiently, and we're not wasting as much energy. In the operation, we know that building management systems, as we've talked about in smart buildings, helps us to really make sure that we're using energy efficiently, and we're assessing and we're measuring all these parameters in a building's operation. Decommission, as we talked about, if we do decommission or we repurpose, how can we make sure that some of our older buildings that weren't designed in a time where we had these digital platforms can catch up with this digital race? And materials, how can we make sure that we're creating a database of materials so that everyone can have access to these databases? And this is something that we can refer to at the initial stages of design. So you can see that the digital transformation in the built environment can really create faster processes, better coordination, and optimize energy output. Now, I'm going to pick on each and every one of these phases in the subsequent slides so that we can start to see some of the ways in which we're making these changes. So here we're looking at machine learning. It's one of my favorite programs. So long been the argument that machine learning excludes the architect, and I don't think that's the case. You put in your parameters for design. But in this database, you as an architect have already decided and defined for the machine to learn what is good design. What is good quality design? And when I put my parameters in, asking for a bedroom, a living room, and a kitchen, all the machine learning does is that it searches through this database of pre-selected and predefined good design to create designs that meet my requirements. So here it is. You can see it very, very cleverly. It's working through the different permutations. But this is determined by what I, as the designer, have already determined as good design. And of course, it spits out a couple of options for me as the designer to decide which I prefer and which I'm going to put in front of my client. If we go to the construction phase, we can see that offsite prefabrication or 3D printing of composite ceramics in a controlled environment means that we're not wasting. It's less wastage because everything is controlled, everything is measured, leaving room for less human error. Equally, when we go onto site, longer are the days that we're looking at dusty and untidy sites. Sites are very clean and sleek environments now, working sites. And we go there and using, as shown in the picture, using virtual reality and augmented reality, we can see in real time what exists in our BIM models so that we can prevent clash. We can use clash detection to prevent any waste in program, any delays, any, really work as efficiently as possible. And in the building operation, we use building management systems. We use BIM enabled by BMS to track a variety of indices, indoor air quality, occupancy levels, a couple to mention. Now, indoor air quality, we all know, is a key index to the overall building health and the mitigation of disease contagion, So, COVID-19, we understand that much of it is to do with ventilation, and that can help. That's one of the preventative measures that we use. How can we measure the indoor air quality to make sure that we're getting good levels of fresh air intake? Through BIM and digitized processes, we can adjust fresh air intake on HVAC systems. And, with improvements in technology, this can happen in real time. Decommission or repurpose. So if we're harking back to our historical assets, designed and built before the age of digital design platforms, we can do this. So, for example, the video that we're watching now shows a building built probably in the 1990s, before we had the proliferation of these digital capacities, and we're using a 360-degree camera on a tripod. I love this clip because you can see the 360 camera passing over your screen right now. And what this does is that it takes the images of thousands and thousands of points of data, and it layers them to build effectively what becomes a model that we can then start to plug some real data into. So our historical buildings need not to be lost in this digital race. We can bring them up to speed, so to speak. Materials, of course. We've seen how the research and development of materials is key and vital in keeping abreast with the race to really combat climate change. And whether it's looking at solar panels that are more efficient and more cost effective and really work seamlessly with our architecture or our architectural designs, or it's looking at how we can battery operate our homes. And of course, we have all these gadgets, but how do we bring them together again for the end user to be able to govern how much energy is used? We have devices such as Home Hubs and Nest, which can really start to measure the amount of energy that's used on a periodical basis so that we can be the authors of our own fate in how we impact climate change, how much energy we use. Now, all these advances are happening at the speed of light, and we do need to keep up and make sure that we're upskilling and making sure that the workforce is equipped to perform within this new digital built environment. Our curriculums within our built-in schools of built environments, within our vocational colleges, need to be up to date so that people who are coming into the workforce are correctly digitally upskilled to give the most efficient services within the construction industry. So what's next? I appreciate it's been a lot to digest, a lot to take on, but hopefully at this point, we're starting to understand the impact that the construction industry has on climate change. We're starting to understand how we can work together, all of us on this call from different parts of the globe, collaborating globally to take action and really try to slow this process. We now understand how we can leverage digital technologies through smart design to start to accelerate our pace in the fight against to curb climate change. So what's left to do? Lead. Now, who is a leader, and what is leadership, and how can we do this? Is a leader someone that has a title, or someone who works for a large corporation, or maybe it's someone that works within politics? I don't think it necessarily has to be any one of those things. Surely there are leaders in all three of those capacities. But leading is about having a passion. Leading is about having a concern. Leading is about having the courage to speak and own your voice and really to take ownership of your future and really wanting to create impact. You don't have to necessarily be in any one of those three categories to be an impactful leader. I mean, we only have to go to Greta Thunberg, 16 years old, not only leading her school or leading her peer group across different countries, but now she has the ear of many world leaders, and she's speaking truth to power about the impacts of climate change and what we need to really be focusing on to curb this. So how apt for women in construction that we hark back to that younger woman, that young girl who was initially passionate about the construction industry, who really wanted to go into this profession and understand what really drove me. Why am I here? And how can I harness some of that passion and use it to drive the change that we need to see? I think that is who a true leader is. And that is what we need to go back to if we're really looking at how we can rebuild for a better normal. Thank you. Thank you for your